Hello everyone, welcome back to EduCASTsyon podcast. Last time we left off with a very humbling experience from our interview with a very knowledgeable person who shared some of his insights from transferring from urban to rural and vice versa.
And this time, we'll be taking a look at how different environmental settings affect the overall teaching experience.
Now without further ado, let's get started on the episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Samuel Torres, and I will be hosting today's interview with a special guest along with my co host.
Tina Silverio, how are you doing everyone?
So, anyway, we would like to welcome our guest for today to our show, the EduCASTsyon podcast.
So, in today's episode, we will be interviewing a very special guest who had a lot of teaching experience from teaching in rural areas till he switched to urban academic institutions. He graduated with a bachelor degree, major in religious education, and he also studied in Ateneo de Manila University with Masters of Arts in Religious Education, FIRE program. And he has been teaching for 17 years now, coming from Nazareth School in Manila for 3 years, Don Bosco, Santa Mesa, Manila for 6 years, and then Xavier's School for 7 years, St. James Academy, Plaridel, Bulacan for 6 months.
Looks like our special guest has a wide variety of experiences. So, without further ado, let us all welcome Mr. Angelo Garcia.
Hello. Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Mr. Angelo Garcia. You're correct. So I'm quite shy. I mean, while listening to how you would introduce me. So yes, so I've been teaching for 17 years. I'm going 18 and I don't know until when. But there. Okay.
A pleasant day to you also, Mr. Garcia. So how are you feeling today?
Basically, this is the first time that I'm invited to a podcast. So I'm a bit nervous, but at the same time, exciting because I think I would have to recall all my experiences back when I first graduated and on different schools. So if you notice a while ago during the introduction, I've been to a lot of schools. Well, not a lot, but different schools with different setups. So it's kind of nice to somehow look back there.
Well, thank you for joining us for your first ever episode. So,
yes.
Thank you for being here.
With all that out of the way, let's now move to our discussion.
So, Mr. Garcia, from your time teaching, what are the most prominent factors that you noticed from moving from a learning institution in a rural area to an urban institution?
The first one, I think, and the most important is, very pressing and I think very evident is the quality of education. Okay, so this is based from my experience. So just want to share with all of you guys that these are all based from my experiences. I think probably things are different now, but during my time, when I transferred from rural to urban, the quality of education in the rural areas are not that okay in a way. In urban areas, they're more advanced, right? And one example would be having to be aided with computers. In urban areas, they have computers already. So, I mean, that would make learning more fun and enjoyable for students, and they get to learn more. And aside from that, more teachers are readily made available in urban areas. So that would mean better curriculum also for the students there. And then what else? One thing also I noticed these basically students are they're given chances, they're given more opportunities to somehow join in competitions, sports, or even extracurricular activities. They have that. In rural areas, they don't have much opportunities to join competitions or, extracurricular activities, probably because they do lack teachers as well who would handle or moderate those organizations or clubs. So probably those are the common or more prominent factors why students or even teachers would transfer from rural to urban areas there.
Alright, so since you've mentioned the transfer from rural to urban areas of both teachers and students, I suppose you've noticed the number of students in your class who would have to transfer. If so, can you elaborate this trend and what are their common reasons for moving?
I've taught for about 3 years or less in a rural area, and then I'm teaching. I taught grade 6 during that time, and of course, it's basically a transition year for students from grade 6. They would really decide if they're still going to push through to high school from the same school, or they would transfer. Sad to say that most of my students, my advisory class, right after grade 6, or they would tell me that they have plans of transferring for a bigger school, a more inviting school, a school that, well, it's kind of somewhat like known. The name would also add up to that there. So definitely, I definitely have experienced a lot of students transferring from rural to urban. One reason, just like aside from what I mentioned earlier, the availability of resources, learning resources like libraries, LRCs. I mean, this is very important for students, right? I mean, some would not even think that this is even an important part of the school, right? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. But still, for there are students who are really looking for a bigger, a much comfortable learning environment, such as a library in the school. And sad to say, the school the school that I was in during that time was, they really, I mean, they do have a library, but in terms of books, available books, some are really obsolete. Some books are, I mean, even other equipments are not functioning. Probably they're just there for display. So again, I'm talking based from my experience. I am not saying these things just to somehow belittle a school or something like that. But in reality, this is really what is happening. I mean, the physical structure of the school would really, I mean, the motivation of the students to stay in a school would depend on the physical structure of the school itself. So one is the library, access to internet, which is also a thing, and then, well, comfortability. If the students are comfortable with the learning environment, I mean, they will stay in that environment or stay in that institution there.
So I guess it really is safe to conclude that students who transfer from rural to urban areas want to change their learning environments because urban areas do have a better learning environment. But how about you yourself, Sir Garcia? Do you find yourself relating to any of your students or having reasons of moving from urban to rural or vice versa?
Yes, exactly. That's why, I mean, just like what was mentioned earlier when I was introduced, well, as you notice, I've transferred from one school over the other, probably because one, I'm looking for, well, of course, we cannot deny the fact that, of course, part of that would be how you would, I mean, how the school will be able to help you in terms of, I mean, you have your own finances also. I mean, you do have, I mean, in terms of that. So the school can also help you provide with the things that you would be needing, right, as a teacher. So that's one. So I have to consider that. Number two, of course, better opportunities for professional growth and development. So if teachers are given given opportunities for them to attend seminars, right? And that would be a help, right? Me as a teacher, especially when I was first assigned to this school. Well, of course, anyway, I don't have to mention the name, right? So
You don't have to, sir.
yeah, yes. So I was given a lot of teaching loads. I was just to share, right? So I was given a lot of teaching loads. Well, just like what was mentioned, also, I'm teaching religion, but in that school. Hopefully they will not be able to hear this from that school. I was also asked to teach PE. I was also asked to teach music there. So I am not, well, they say teachers, well, they can supposed to be flexible, right? But if you were unable to master that subject or even the skills, it will be unfair for the students, correct? Right? So it is really quite hard. So, well, I stayed there for 3 years, but I think in my 3 years of staying and then teaching those subjects which I'm not really comfortable in teaching, it's kind of made me sad because, well, I was not able to really maximize my skill as a teacher and then teach the subject that I'm good at, which is, well, religion in that sense. So that's why I need to transfer. I wanted to really refocus and go back to my specialization, right? So, I mean, of course, you have to go to a particular school that will really help you out in terms of growing in that area particularly. So I have to transfer. So I think, well, same goes with those students who thought of transferring. They also wanted to grow. They also wanted to learn more. They also wanted to develop. So I think that's the main reason. Am I speaking too much or something?
No, it's
No, go
okay. It's okay.
There.
Opo.
Okay, so I mean, probably those are the reasons why I have to transfer. And probably, hopefully, I will not transfer. I mean, I would stop and really will stay in this where I am now. Hopefully. Hopefully, yes.
Alright, so as we have previously mentioned in our previous episodes, some students behave differently depending on their circumstances. And many contexts involved talaga. So can you please give us an example of how different the approaches of students are between urban and rural areas?
Okay, so surprisingly, I don't know if teachers or even people do have a certain notion about students in rural areas, but surprisingly, when I was given opportunity to teach in a rural area, I mean, students are really disciplined. They have this somehow kind of fear when it comes to their teachers. So whenever a teacher is already there or about to enter the classroom, they would really go back to their places and really behave as if I'm not exaggerating things, but they're really like that. They really behave. They're really very disciplined. And I think it's kind of really fun teaching in the classroom where you really don't have to worry about calling out students because they are misbehaving. So, well, I mean, I'm speaking for my experience. I don't know with other schools in the rural areas, but that is basically what I was able to observe. While in urban areas, yes, pretty much the same thing. But well, to tell you honestly, some students are quite. They do have this entitled kind of an attitude. I don't know if that's even a term, entitlement, right? Parang since they're pretty much sheltered, right, in a way. So they have this tendency to go overboard. They don't know their limitations, their boundaries when it comes to behavior. So just like a spoiled brat, right? You have to really talk it out with him or something like that. So not all, but I've encountered a few. So those were some of the things that I think. This is pretty much based from what I've experienced, what I've seen, what I've observed, right? But not all, not all. Some students a lot of students also in urban areas are very disciplined. Some students were really, having this bad kind of attitude in rural areas at the same time. So pretty much mixed in that sense. You really can't draw the line between behaviors of students in urban or in rural areas. They have a mix of both, actually. They have a mix of both.
So I guess it's safe to say that students everywhere are very diverse.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending on what school, it doesn't really, depending on where you're from, it doesn't justify how you are as a student.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Moving along from students, Mr. Garcia, how significant, in your opinion, are the effects of regional variables such as economic factors, social factors, industrialization, and so on to a region's educational growth?
Okay, that's a tough question though. So basically, I've seen more of the negative effect of that, one of which is economic, for example, development. If, of course, parents, let's start it off from parents, because if parents doesn't have much income, I think that would be a major problem for them. So they can't send their sons, their children to school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine just simply they have to bear, cost of tuition fees, right? Books, probably, supplies, uniforms, so on and so forth. So if they don't have much income, how can they even afford those things, right? So that's one major factor, right? I think it has something to do with poverty also at the same time. Parents also, if parents they were unable to finish school, they won't be able also to see the importance of education. Believe me, I've talked to a lot of parents who were unable to finish school and they don't see the importance of having to finish school even up to college. For them, if you are an elementary graduate, you're good to go. You have to find a job, feed the family, or help out in the family, so on and so forth. So that's actually education is but secondary or not even part of the priority for them. For them, they have to find a job, source of income, something like that for them to be able to have something on the table. So that's basically a thing for them. So on a more positive note naman, if it's for industrialization, of course, in terms of education, of course, that would greatly help. More people will be educated, and since they are all educated, better opportunities are with them, right? In terms of for their future, right? So I think both still a mix of both positive and negative effects also in terms of those factors there.
It makes sense naman, Sir Garcia, how mixed things can get when it comes to having pros and cons of industrialization and economic growth. But on that same note, what do you believe can be done to alleviate or allow rural parts in the country to catch up with the urban educational advancements?
Actually, sad to say, if I don't know if you're, I mean, if this has been an issue, a pressing concern in the Philippines, right? Education, and a lot of people are really pushing for a budget that will be allocated for education. But sad to say, I mean, even if this has been pushed, still a lot of people in the rural areas are not don't have enough what do you call this one, capability for them to even cater to the needs of the students, to the needs of the people, yes, especially in terms of education. So one is correct allocation of budget. Okay, so the main reason why urban areas are more prominent is because they have the budget, right? So they have the budget for it. I mean, they can just build more infrastructures. They can invite more teachers to join the institution, right? And with that, of course, it's quite inviting for young people to even enroll in that particular institution. So how about the schools in the rural areas? If budget are not properly allocated, what will happen to them? So I think that's one main problem that we have: correct allocation of budget, and of course, I mean the budget itself for education. So of course, to have a proportion of qualified teachers, that would also be another factor, right? So there are a lot of teachers, but quality teachers, of course, are really, really in demand now, right? But more teachers, well, we need more teachers, but, well, I'm not trying to, stereotype teachers, or education itself, but some people don't see education as a course, as something that is quite inviting for them to even take in, right? For them to even choose, right? I mean, it depends on the season. Kasi before, during my time, nursing or any medical related thing yung uso in that sense, right?
Right.
Ngayon ulit kasi pandemic. So, yun. So, that's another thing I think that, sad to say, I mean, people are focusing much on the exterior part, not on what is really needed. Budget, right? Something like that.
Budget allocation is very important for developing infrastructure, the general learning environment, and for the teachers to have better capacities in teaching students. But
exactly.
Is there anything that's different within urban and rural curriculums? Is there anything that is different from urban education and rural education that needs to be changed in your opinion?
In rural areas, kasi they do follow the DepEd curriculum. So whatever the DepEd would say, they would follow because they're under the DepEd curriculum. In urban areas where private schools are actually there, they have this privilege to modify, to have their own curriculum. Let's say, for example, your school, right? I mean, say your school, Ateneo, other schools, universities, they have privilege to modify their own curriculum depending on the need of the students. So that's basically what I see. I mean, that's the big difference that we have for when it comes to curriculum. Yes, modification for rural areas, they can also do that, but of course, at the same time, they have to follow the structure, a certain structure given by the DepEd. So that's basically one. If a teacher wanted to be more innovative in terms of somehow making the curriculum flexible, well, there's a process that the teacher have to go through even before having those curriculum approved. In that way, but if it will help, of course. I mean, all of this the process even will all boil down to the need of the learners, the students. So I think they can still compromise when it comes to that. So that's the difference of the curriculum in general there.
So it's good knowing that there are institutions out there that adapt to their students' needs.
Exactly. They have to. Yeah.
So with that in mind, Mr. Garcia, what can a regular student or regular citizen do to assist folks in rural areas who may be in need of assistance?
To tell you honestly, there isn't much. Well, this is a pressing concern, but people, I think, they are not fully aware of what is really happening or what the issue is when it comes to education. It's either they're not aware or they just don't care, but there. So we have to pretty much be made aware of what is really happening or the issue that we are all facing, especially here in the Philippines. Probably one would be simply volunteering to any. Well, I myself, when I was still in college, I do volunteer. Part of my what do you call this one? Formation when I was in college is to go to the remote areas, as in literally remote areas. You have to go to the mountains. So I did experience that. And then, well, I'm teaching religion, but when I was assigned to a particular place up in the mountains of Pampanga, there I encountered the ITAS people
Yes.
there. Yes, and I stayed there for a month. So I wasn't able to teach religion because that's not a priority for them, right? I mean, their main priority is how they will be able to survive the day. So it's more of livelihood in that sense. So pretty sad because, I mean, if you're just come to think of it, and if you just have to compare, I mean, people in the urban areas are really enjoying education while people here, diba, in the mountains, I mean, that's not even their priority there. So volunteer work, I think that's one, especially in remote areas. We do have a lot of schools in the remote areas, right? And I really do admire teachers who really would go out of their way just for them to be able to send the modules or to bring those modules for students in rural areas. I don't know if you've seen that, right? The moment this pandemic hit us, right? A lot of teachers would go from one place to the other just for them to share or give those modules to be used by the students there. So that's one. Well, monetary donation, well, I think that's general already, right? Or pre-loved books, right? Those pre-loved books that are really needed. Books are really expensive, right? I think you can all agree with me and say books are really expensive, and teachers do not use those books much often, right? They will just ask you to read for a couple of pages and that's it. There. So that's another one. Adapt a school program. So I've been to a school wherein they do in a way adapt, as they do have. I don't know if you call it a brother school or something, but they have adapted this school, and then whatever concerns they do have in their main school, they would also apply it to the adapted school. So that is also that's actually a good initiative of the school, and I just hope all schools, I mean schools that are capable, I mean big schools, can also do that to really help out, because just like what I said earlier, allocation of budget, I mean there isn't much budget to begin with. So, well, I mean, individual people can actually, well, they need to, in a way, start to initiate, right, or to volunteer for this cause. There.
Hopefully people do understand the significance of education with their country, because education really isn't the top priority that our country is prioritizing. But
Actually,
moving
sad,
along from
right?
that, yeah, really is hard to get people to understand how important education is to alleviate more of our country's problems and issues, because it stems from education, and every other issue we have as a nation is interconnected with one another. So hopefully we do realize this. But moving along from that, Mr. Garcia, what are the challenges that you face during your time teaching in rural areas?
Accessibility to reading materials. They don't have much books. The books that the books that they were able to acquire probably came from their older brothers that has been passed on from generation to generation, something like that. So they use pretty much the same books. And of course, topics change, right? Let's say, for example, 1 + 1 today, probably later on, well, let's not talk about math, but there might be different. Probably 1 + 1 ngayon is 2, but next in the years after that, baka hindi na 2. Something like that. Okay, so pretty much the reading materials, that's one. Instructions also are much different from urban to in rural areas, and then in urban areas as well. Some students in rural areas they tend to learn, I don't want to call it slow learners, but I can't think of a better term now, but pretty much something like that in rural areas, probably because of the circumstances that they're in, the situation, the availability of resources. So, well, I think it's safe to say that this will all boil down to poverty. They don't have much. They can't afford good quality, resources. Well, even if resources are made available for them, they can't afford it. That is why that's one, I think, of a challenge that they are facing right now, those who are in the rural areas. Just to share with you a quick story. Um, I've well, in as much as I really wanted to be quite creative, I did ask my students to bring materials, the usual art paper, right, glue, diba? In grade school, right, something like that. And to my surprise, I have 32 students in a classroom, and then to my surprise, when I the next day, only two students were able to bring those materials, and they are not even complete. So very sad when I asked a couple of students, they said that they can't afford those materials. So, well, very heartbreaking for me to, how can I even, I mean, how, in as much as a teacher would really want to be creative in how he or she will be able to deliver the instruction in the classroom, if there are no materials available for both students and teachers, I mean, it will really be quite hard. So, there, very, very frustrating for teachers. And in as much as whenever I would see students in the eyes and parang sense that they are really eager to learn, but they don't have any means. So, really, really, really hard. Talaga, sobrang something like that. Seriously, yes. Really sad, actually.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, really. And with your concrete story, it's easier to picture how difficult it can get, even in such a simple story. Parang it would really draw your heartstrings. And so I'm saying this also because I personally want to become an educator myself.
Oh,
So I really appreciate the insights you're sharing.
welcome to the club.
Thank you. Okay, so do you think 10 years from now, the gap between school institutions in rural and urban areas will narrow down?
It is not impossible, right? Of course, we do hope. I mean, this is basically pretty much our dream, right? Not to even feel that there is indeed a gap between rural areas and then urban areas when it comes to education. Is it safe to say that the government really need to prioritize education? Well, I've been mentioning that a couple of times, right? I'm like a parrot here, there. So there is, I have classmates who transferred from urban to rural areas, and then whenever we would have this reunion, they would share stories like how they were able to survive a day in a rural area, in a classroom in rural areas, and then I mean, nowadays, when the last time that we were together, I mean, there isn't any much of a difference when it comes to teaching. I mean, schools in education also in rural areas are really evolving, right? And thank God there. And I just hope later on we won't really feel that there is indeed a gap between education. In education between rural and urban areas, right? So there. Well, hopefully all of these things will be addressed, especially yung budget allocation. Really, really, really in need. I mean, we really need that, especially in the rural areas. Correct.
People really need to understand that education is important, because in a sense that there are other issues in the country such as corruption, wherein if corruption exists, then proper budget allocation for education and alleviating poverty is an issue. And through poverty, we won't have proper development of our education, and corruption will continue to exist. But the thing is, without education, citizens won't be able to understand how to alleviate poverty and corruption as a whole and other issues within the country. So education really is a priority. And something that I'd like to mention, what you mentioned a while ago with regards to how students in rural areas have outdated materials, and how you yourself as a teacher try to be creative. And it just made me remember one quote from John Dewey. He's an educational philosopher, and he said that if we teach today as we did yesterday, then we rob our children of tomorrow. In the sense that it states how learning is ever evolving, and there are always going to be new ways to teach students, for students to learn, and hopefully rural areas will be able to adapt to the modern ways of teaching.
Exactly. A nice point there. Actually, education is a basic human right. So students do have right to education, right? So they are all entitled to, and then they are supposed to be educated in that sense. So we cannot just grab that away from them just because we don't have any resources or means. Well, I will go back again to my don't know if it's a personal issue or something like that, but still, yeah, kind of sad talaga na in as much as they wanted to study, they can't because they don't have much resources to start it with there.
Right. I really like the point you raised, co-host Sam, and I'd like to share my main takeaways from this whole interview. I really like how we were able to pinpoint the intricacies and the connections between the poverty, corruption, and education, even economics, and how it all relates with one another in such a way that one has an effect to the other. And
Exactly.
and I also really like what you've shared about how teachers, the quality teachers, are also really important. And this is not to say that the teachers we have aren't quality or the teachers we have are inferior, but this is just to raise awareness that in reality there is quite a discrepancy or inconsistency with the whole thing, and it's not only pinpointing that education is not prioritized. There's also this corruption issue, there's also this poverty issue, and everything comes into play. So that's just a point and the takeaway that I'd like to say. How about you, Sam? What was your takeaways?
I think I've mentioned everything I wanted to mention a while ago
All
for
right.
the most part.
And just like that, we are wrapping another episode up again. And we would like to thank our listeners for staying all throughout this episode. And of course, our very special guest, Mr. Garcia. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and as much as we did, lalo na first time niyo pa po na nag-guest sa isang podcast.
I did enjoy actually. I'm a lot of things to say pa, joke. But anyway, I did enjoy it. So yeah, I hope I was able to somehow, well, with my sharing, I hope I was able to share a little bit of things here, and well, the listeners here, I hope they also learn a lot and how they will really treasure education. I mean, I take note, they are all, I mean, lucky to be in an institution to start it with, right? So love education. You have to really love it, right? So there. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm sure our listeners out there have widened their understanding of how important education is. So thank you for being insightful and honest with your answers, and we greatly appreciate your fruitful discussion.
Thank you also. Thank you.
And looking back, it is quite unbelievable that we have a few remaining episodes left. So stay tuned for our next episodes, because I heard we are preparing something special up our sleeves. So that is something we could all look forward to.
Yes, Gina, may we also remind you to catch us on our other social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify, and like our Facebook page. Links are down below in the description. Once again, my name is Samuel Torres.
I am Tina Silverio. That is all for today. This has been EduCASTsyon Podcast. May we all have a great week ahead of us.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Bye!